Ladies and gentlemen, if you would be so kind to silence any cell phone or any other electronic device you may have with you today. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, at times like these, we initially turn to the psalmist for some comfort. I'm going to chant the 23rd Psalm in Hebrew, its original, at the conclusion of which I will ask that you please join me in reciting the 23rd Psalm together in English. מזמור לדוד. אדוני אלוהי לא אחסור, בנוזדש ירביצני, על מי מנוחוס ינחלני. נפשי ישובב ינחני במגלי צדק למען שמו. גם כי אלך בגיא צלמובס לא ירא, כי אתה עמדי. שבטך ומשענתך המה ינחמוני. תערוך לפני שולחן נגד צוררי, תשענת בשמן ראשי, כוסי רוויו. אך טוב וחסד ירדפוני כל ימי חיי. ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך ימים. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. To begin today's memories, we call upon Marjorie Irish.
Good afternoon. And it is a good afternoon because we're celebrating the life of an extraordinary human being. I've found over the years that when I lose somebody who's really, really special to me, I write them a letter, and it helps me. And today, you're about to hear the letter that I wrote to Sheldon. Dear, dear Sheldon, go ahead and start laughing. I'm already in trouble, for I spelled Sheldon seldom. Thank heavens you weren't a seldom Sheldon, for as a Sheldon, you, Doris, and the girls might never have been on the SS United States, returning home from a vacation from London, serving our State Department at the Court of St. James. At least I think that that's what you were doing there. My dad and I were returning from a business trip to Europe, which almost led to flying over and sailing home. On that particular night, we dined rather late, and as we did after dinner most nights, we'd ventured down to the ballroom for the evening's entertainment. The ballroom was crowded, but Dad noticed an attractive couple seated behind a coffee table with an empty chair at either end. And in our usual shy ways, we paraded over and introduced ourselves to you too. Thus the start of a glorious friendship which has truly enriched my life for the past 55 years. 55 years? Even I was young then. When Liz moved to Virginia to teach, Doris and you were incredibly kind. She visited with you with some frequency, which calmed my mind. When James moved to D.C., he came to know and revere you on his own, and I knew that once again you had taken another one of my babies under your wings. Of course, we all remember when you five came to visit us in Connecticut. Out came the sleeping bags when we ran out of beds. You, as a tender, loving dad, gathered the young'uns, issued a nighttime order. Time to go to floor. It became a favorite mantra. You and Doris, too, were very forgiving, even when I most gracefully backed into your rhododendron. She might have wanted to not so gracefully back into me, but instead you both started laughing. Thus, amidst my apologies, I laughed too, and then fled back to Connecticut. Margie popped up Saturday night for a couple of hours when we learned that you had slipped away. It was a treasured visit as we shared our sadness and some favorite memories. One of the best was when I think you were being inducted, is that the right word, as ambassador to Trinidad and Tobago. There was an impressive ceremony at the Department of State, which Secretary James Baker hosted for you. I headed on crutches, can't remember why crutches, to the receiving line. Margie was interning in D.C. for the summer and was wearing a pretty white linen dress. As we drew near, you looked and said to me, "Ah, I see you brought your nurse with you." Never one to miss a great line at the perfect moment. That was only part of why we loved you so. Your humor was delicious, infectious, and at times a bit raunchy. And I'd wager that most of our times together were spent laughing. Certainly our phone calls echoed such. As a matter of fact, I have a few hilarious stories I'm itching to share with you, but I think better not today. Best I send them up to you in heaven when you and Doris can both enjoy them. Oh, Sheldon, I told your amazing, beautiful, wonderful girls that I had had a vision of you floating heaven-bound into the arms of your beloved Doris. Can't imagine what comments you'd make about that. That's one more thing that I'd best omit from this shared note. To say how much I love you sounds almost trite. So too my overwhelming gratitude for what you have given not only to me, but to each of my children. Well, they're over there somewhere, yeah. Witness their presence here with all of us today. Liz traveling from North Carolina, James from France, Margie from New York. I feel, no, I am truly blessed. Dearest friend, in peace, go to floor.
I better put my glasses on so I read it properly. It's an honor to be here today to give tribute to our dear friend Sheldon. We first met Doris and Sheldon through Susan, who was a classmate of our daughter Karen, who's here today. They started in 7th grade together. That was a couple of years ago, over 40. You'll be happy to know, though, that Sheldon and I follow the same thought that no one ever complained about giving a short speech, so this will be a short speech. There was a natural affinity between our families. We have celebrated New Year's Eve together for many years, although making midnight was always a problem. We've had lunch together many times with our mutual friend Dave Rowland, who is also here. The three of us served on the Peabody board together, and we worked to select the annual Peabody Board Peabody Award, which is known to be the be and end all of in broadcasting. It was a labor of love for us to serve on that committee, and took a lot of time and a lot of effort, but Sheldon liked it in particular because it reminded him of the time when he was a disc jockey back in Nebraska, which he always told us about. We also attended the weddings of Wendy and Scott, of Madeline and Jack, Susan and Kenny, and Sheldon was so proud of the three families. It was always a blessing to be with Sheldon when he talked about the families and how wonderful they were doing and how good they were to him in particular. He also was a very proud grandfather. He never missed the opportunity to talk about Ella and Teddy. He took the grandfather's privilege of bragging about grandchildren, which we all do. We also were fortunate enough to have a lovely time at the 90th birthday party dinner with Sheldon and the family. That was a real treat. It was something special. Sheldon was doing fine at that time. He appreciated it greatly, and it was a special occasion. Not many people marked the 90th year, particularly with a party with a lot of fun. We can't overlook Sheldon's sense of humor. Sheldon's father, who died before I ever met him, Sheldon always said that his father and my father were quite alike. Both men were quick with jokes and puns. And my father used to have a contest with Sheldon about Henny Youngman jokes. Who could come up with the funniest of the Henny Youngman one-liners? Young people probably don't even know who Henny Youngman was, but he was a funny man. For example, he always gave this particular phrase, joke, pun, which he enjoyed doing it, and Sheldon repeated it frequently. The patient says, "Doctor, it always hurts when I do this." And the doctor says, "Then don't do this." Sheldon could do a much better accent than I could, but that was one of his favorite lines. In 1985, Sheldon was appointed ambassador to Trinidad and Tobago by President Reagan. Marsh and I were fortunate enough to be at his appointment, at the State Department. We also were fortunate enough to visit them in Trinidad and Tobago when we stayed at the ambassadorial residence with them. It was a great time. Many memories etched in our minds. One, when I was thinking, came particularly to my attention, was two things actually. One was Sheldon insisted that we have callaloo soup. Now, none of you, I'm sure he remembers. Callaloo soup is like a soup with spinach in it, but they have it all the time in Trinidad, and we, of course, participated. You can't miss it. When Sheldon says do it, you do it. But among one of the things that we did was we took a trip with Doris and Sheldon to Tobago, which at that time had one tiny little resort, which really was very primitive. Sheldon and I were playing the athlete. We played tennis late in the afternoon. We were all sweaty and dirty, and we each got back to our cabins and took our showers, and upon completion of the showers, the power on the island went off. So there was no electricity. And we didn't know what to do, but we decided that we would all meet on Sheldon's porch with Doris and Marcia. We met together, and for good fortune, Sheldon brought a bottle of scotch with him. So after several drinks and many stories and many jokes, we decided we ought to eat. It was still dark, but Doris, the leader, picked up the candle from the table, held it over her head like the Statue of Liberty, and proceeded down through the palm trees to the place where we ate. It was a lovely dinner. The power came on as we sat down, and we were entertained by a steel band. But a great memory with two great friends. While we were at the ambassadorial residence with Sheldon, he insisted that we watch Young Frankenstein. Some of you may know that, the younger people may not. It's a 1974 movie. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It stars Gene Wilder and Cloris Leachman. And in a non-credited role, it has a surprise. I won't tell you about it because you'll recognize it when you see it. Mel Brooks was famous for one-liners. Well, he put a lot of one-liners and a lot of double entendre and sometimes uncouth suggestions in the movie. I know Sheldon knew, I think, half the lines, and I think Susan knew as many lines as Sheldon. I suggest that anytime you're feeling down, remember Sheldon. Go watch the movie, laugh and enjoy it. You will, and it will bring back, later in life, it will bring back great memories to you. Sheldon also told us subsequently that when they were there in Trinidad, the writer James Michener, who wrote The Caribbean, came and stayed at the house with them. He was not a particularly pleasant man, apparently, but Sheldon insisted that he watch the Young Frankenstein movie. And at the end of the movie, Michener said to Sheldon, that is the stupidest movie I've ever seen. He had no sense of humor at all. Sheldon, he was a man who dined with kings, queens, presidents, the world's famous. He enjoys the finer things in life, but he was not afraid to laugh at the childlike and silly innuendos and double entendres of Young Frankenstein. That man had a wonderful sense of humor. I'll close by noting that our families got along so well that when Doris and Sheldon were out of the country, Susan was at school at Miami, and before Miami and Miami, she became close friends with our daughter Karen, and we became Susan's surrogate parents while the Kryses were away. To this day, Susan still calls us other mom, another dad. A relationship we cherish. Before my father died, he said, "When I die, don't mourn, but go out and have a party." He said, "I have lived a great life, done more than expected for a poor kid who grew up in the Bronx." And I know Sheldon would have the same feeling. He accomplished so much, and he'd say the exact same thing. Go out and have a party and laugh. He was so proud of his family, what they all have accomplished, and God bless them all.
Good afternoon. What happens when the thread of time weaves itself a close? Does it choose the manner by which it ties its knot? All questions I may never have answers to. All questions that we would have discussed with one another for hours and hours after our plates had been cleared. Or maybe I would ask you who had the greatest gaffe in late night last week, although that one may have required its own seminar, to be honest. Standing here now in your absence, I find myself asking how I go forward with my young adulthood, embodying all the memories we cherished together and lessons I learned by having the privilege to look up to you throughout my youth. And yet I find that answer. To cherish your memory is to celebrate your life to its fullest, for all the things that life meant to me, to our family, to all of us who gathered here today. To a life that brought us all such great generosity and an ever innovative sense of humor. To a life of such honorable achievement and selflessness. To a life lived as an inspiration to many of the ways that I aim to live my own. That is the answer I find with the utmost clarity. May you live on through the best in all of us, Granddad. We will all miss you dearly.
Psalm 24. לדוד מזמור לאדוני הארץ ומלואו תבל ויושבו כי הוא הימים יסודו ועל נהרו שיכוננו מעל בהר אדוני ומי יקום במקום קודשו נקי כפיים ובר לבב אשר לא נושא לשווא נפשי ולא נשבר מרמה יישא ברכה מעז אדוני וצדקה מאלוהי ישוע. I'm going to recite a portion of this Psalm 24 in English, and I will be certain when you hear the translation that you know precisely why I've chosen this psalm today in memory and in honor of Sheldon J. Krys. A Psalm of David. The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein. For he has founded it upon the seas and established it upon the floods. Who shall ascend into the mountain of the Lord, and who shall stand in his holy place? He that has clean hands and a pure heart, who has not taken God's name in vain and has not sworn deceitfully. He shall receive a blessing from the Lord and righteousness from the God of his salvation. Sheldon, for certain. We now call upon Susan for the eulogy.
Thank you. And unlike others, I've never been known to tell a short story, so bear with me. Call when you get there. This request followed my sisters, our mother, and me through the years. Every time we parted, Dad wanted to know that we had reached our destination safely. It didn't matter if we were flying across an ocean or driving home from a mere 3 miles away. He wouldn't rest until he knew his loved ones had safely arrived. He was that way. He adored us. And I think all he had experienced in the world, especially during his years in the Foreign Service, led him to fear all the things that might befall us, even on the shortest of journeys. Often, my very impertinent response as a young person as I walked out the door would be, "Look both ways before you cross the street and don't stick a fork in the toaster." And so that eventually became one long departing sentence. Call when you get home, look both ways before you cross the street, don't stick a fork in the toaster. Bye, Dad, love you. And out I went. Of course, he was one to worry about his girls. Oh, a father with a wife and 3 daughters, we had him soundly outnumbered. In fact, he used to say he was surrounded. Even the dogs were female. And as he would say, the 2 ponies we had were geldings. Things were a lot less politically correct back then. Dad had a terrific sense of humor, as you've heard from others today, and as you know yourselves. And he could remember and retell so many jokes, which is a talent I did not inherit. His recall of a good joke was amazing, and his timing was spot on. When I was a young child, we used to do these little comedy routines together, with him playing the straight man and encouraging me to deliver the punchlines. It was silly stuff, and we had a lot of fun. There were few things he enjoyed more than making others laugh and laughing with them. In fact, when he was a young man, he was a clown, an actual clown, entertaining children. Absolutely terrifying for me. Not a fan of clowns. That joy of entertaining others must have been what led him into an early career in radio. He was involved in the Intercollegiate Broadcasting Network here in Washington, doing a show called What's Happening with Teenage Washington. Radio took Dad out actually to Rapid City, South Dakota, as a news broadcaster on a large network that consisted of 2 stations. Considering the population of South Dakota at the time, that was big stuff. In 1956, while doing an evening news program, Dad was approached by someone who had heard him broadcasting and asked Dad to run his political campaign for Congress. While ultimately that candidate lost, that is what led in subsequent years to Dad getting involved in John F. Kennedy's presidential campaign. This was how Dad, in 1961, entered his long and remarkable career in government. First job, Director of Public Affairs for the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service. He began his career at the State Department in 1962 and was sent to his first post as a Foreign Service officer in 1965 to London, where my sisters and I were born. His next post took us to Belgrade, Yugoslavia. It was then the mid-70s, and we lived at Krys 2, around the corner from President Tito's palace. Important memories of Belgrade included going to the American Club to go bowling and watch movies, Yugoslav women cooking bell peppers over outside fires in like big oil drums, and pinching my cheeks really hard to appreciate my dimples. Roller skating up and down the dead-end street while Tito's officers patrolled it. I mean, what can I say? I was 8 when I left, so those were my memories of Belgrade. Following Yugoslavia, Dad spent a year in the National War College, which he described as one of the best years of his life, not only for what he learned and the perspective he gained, but also because of the people he met who became lifelong colleagues and friends. He then joined the Inspection Corps, and I remember as a kid being relieved to not be traveling to another overseas post. Dad would be gone, though, sometimes for a few months at a time, or perhaps it just felt that way because I was so young, traveling to embassies in Africa and the Middle East. As we headed through our teenage years, Dad became the executive director for the Bureau of Near Eastern and South Asian Affairs. This was the late 70s, early 80s, very tumultuous times in that part of the world. His work during the Iran hostage crisis had him at State Department around the clock, leading my mother to refer to him as the 53rd hostage. Most nights we would be in bed well before he came home, if he came home at all. I remember vividly the release of the 52 hostages and their homecoming. We rode on the buses with the families of the hostages to Andrews Air Force Base, the streets lined with throngs of cheering people wearing yellow ribbons and waving flags and banners. Then their arrival, which was just an incredible, emotional time of jubilation and relief. And out of that dark time, Dad made lifelong friends, some of whom are watching on this live stream, including Kathy and Joe Stafford, and Mark and Cora Lijek of the Canadian Six, as well as Richard Queen and Bill Keogh. In fact, it was Bill's wife, Catherine, who many years later, when she was president of St. John Fisher College, bestowed upon my father an honorary doctorate of philosophy degree. As I prepared myself to go off to college, Dad was appointed as ambassador to Trinidad and Tobago, as you've heard. He and my sisters flew down in the late summer to introduce him to his post, while my mother and I drove to southwestern Ohio with all my stuff packed into the old yellow Volvo. I think I got the short end of that journey. Sorry, lots of pages. What wonderful years they spent there, and I certainly enjoyed escaping the cold Ohio winters to head to the Caribbean to spend time with them. Trinidad was Dad's last overseas post. He spent the final years of his career appointed as Assistant Secretary of Administration and Information Management, and then Assistant Secretary for Diplomatic Security, where he played a vital role in protecting U.S. embassies and diplomats abroad. He was always protecting someone through his life. Dad's career gave us daughters incredible opportunities and also taught us resilience, respect for other cultures, and the ability to make new friends when we found ourselves in a new land. I don't think any of us truly understood until years later how unique our upbringing was. And I don't think it was until I was in college and beyond that I really got to know my father and learn who he was. Dad loved music, especially some of the jazz greats, Louis Armstrong, Ella Fitzgerald, Fats Waller, and Carmen McRae, to name just a few. But he also loved the Neils, Neil Diamond, and Neil Sedaka. I really can't explain that, especially in the context of the story he would tell about how when they were in London, he and our mother heard the Beatles and thought they were awful and never going to make it. Then his time in Trinidad introduced him to calypso and soca music, such fun. He enjoyed the humorous songs, especially those that poked fun at politicians and the government. And David Rudder and the Mighty Sparrow were two of his favorites. And he was a great dancer. Yes, I used to dance when I was a little girl, standing on his shoe tops with him holding my hands. He would do the waltz, and we would make loops around the living room. When we speak of my father, they mention his kindness, generosity, and desire to help others, especially providing for their children. Toys, clothing, education. He really cared for and wanted to take care of the people whose lives intersected with his. He was so generous and quick to offer hospitality, even when he was in the hospital 5 years ago, recovering from a horrible bout of pneumonia that nearly took his life. Delirious, he would ask the nurses to join him at his little hospital table, you know, the one that pulls over the bed. When he was presented with a meal, please sit. Have you had anything to eat? Look, help yourself. I have way more than I can eat here. He was so sweet. Poor Dad, that recovery was so difficult, and it was exacerbated by my sisters and my inability to understand what he was trying to tell us in the beginning, because he had been intubated for 2 weeks. And after, his throat was terribly sore and badly irritated from where the tubes had been, and he could really only mouth words for the first couple of days. Well, apparently my sisters and I don't read lips well, and he would try to make us understand. And then, like Dad was, he would roll his eyes in exasperation as we made bad guesses as to what he might be saying. It was something like out of his favorite film, Young Frankenstein. The charade scene where Gene Wilder's Frankenstein was being choked by the monster, and he's trying to tell Igor and Inga to give the monster a sedative. But they're working it out in charades, so they're going word by word, and they get the first 3 words, right? Give him the, and then the last word they're doing by syllables, and he's saying, you know, it sounds like give. Oh! Give him the sedative. Give him the sedative. Sedative? Yes, that was exactly how it was with Dad. Poor thing. He was so frustrated with us. Not everyone understood or shared his sense of humor, though. Many have spoken about Young Frankenstein, and of course it played a role in my talk here today as well. Fortunately, our mother and her family did. Dad loved being a part of our wonderful family in Belgium. His French was passable, although if you asked him, he would tell you he was fluent. And I shouldn't joke because his French was a lot better than mine. With such a small family here, though, in the US, he delighted in being welcomed into a family with dozens of brothers and sisters-in-law, nieces, nephews, uncles, aunts, and cousins. Well, he wasn't exactly welcomed at first. In fact, my mother's father sent my grandmother to put a stop to the relationship. All the way from Belgium, my granny flew to the US, met my father, and was promptly, completely won over by this charming, gentle man who had wooed their daughter. She called Belgium shortly thereafter to say, Jacques, the wedding is on. That, of course, is some of the family lore, and Dad quickly learned all the Damtine family lore and lineage and history, and assimilated into the boisterous, fun-loving family culture, becoming a beloved brother-in-law and dear Oncle Sheldon to my cousins. Many of our Belgian family came to visit us over the years, staying at my parents' house out in Potomac, and we always enjoyed having them on our side of the pond. 3 sisters of my Uncle Mickey, my mother's only brother, visited us a few years ago before my mother died, on their way to a much-anticipated vacation in New York City. After the first couple of days, their New York plans were literally swept away by Hurricane Sandy. Of course, Mom and Dad immediately set about making sure that their extended stay in DC was at least a decent substitution for the vacation that they had planned for in the Big Apple. What resulted was a wonderful 10 days during which we had the chance to get to know each other better and enjoy being together, bonding over this unusual turn of events. Sharing the news with our family across the sea has been especially hard, but also filled with so much love and so many beautiful remembrances that I feel that Dad has managed again to bring us together, reminding us how our love for each other can be a bridge to the other side of our grief. I'd like to share some of our cousins' lovely words to my sisters and me upon learning of Dad's passing. Your father, our Uncle Sheldon, that name resounds since childhood as something special, something I didn't really know. After having passed for 10 days with him in Tontoris, this is what that special thing can be. His name, Uncle Sheldon, sounds heartwarming, sparkling kindness, special presents to each, a joyful laugh. Could it be that he art-ed life? He was the best of uncles, the most attentive to everyone, the most intelligent, the least pretentious, the most sincere, and in any case, the most popular with the good teens. Your father was a man full of tenderness and had a great sense of humor. He was considerate, and with your mother they formed a wonderful couple. It saddens me that he is no longer here, but at the same time I am delighted to know he is with Doris again. Beautiful souls are not made to be separated. Spot on, those words. Dad had no greater love than his love for our mother. I think he was in love with her from the moment they met at a diplomatic function here in Washington. He would always say that she arrived on the arms of 2 Italian men, but she left on his. She was his heart from then on, through nearly 50 years of marriage, and he, like us, was set emotionally adrift when cancer took her from us 10 years ago. I know that the comfort he took in his last days was rooted in the anticipation of seeing her again. I hope that you are on your way to be in her arms again now, Dad. Bye, Dad, love you. Call when you get there.
Before I chant the memorial prayer, I take license in addressing you in memory of Sheldon, briefly. My dear Wendy and Scott, Madeline and Jack, Susan and Ken, and of course Ella and Teddy. Dear friends, you've heard from Susan about the outstanding accomplishments of the Honorable Sheldon Jack Krys. I have chosen, therefore, in the very next few moments, to speak not about what he accomplished, but rather what he was and why. The word that comes to my mind without question is the Yiddish word mensch. Sheldon was the epitome of a mensch, a person of great integrity and honor. He was admirable, had noble character, and was an exemplary good man. To illustrate, when my father, Abe Nadell, passed away suddenly in 1985, he was only 58 years old. His funeral took place the very next day after his passing, not leaving much opportunity for figuring out where you're going to be or what you're going to do. Sheldon was made aware of this tragedy. And when my mother and our family arrived at the funeral home, who was standing outside in the cold February morning, waiting for us? Sheldon Krys. He flew to New York, hired a car, and came to the funeral to be with my family and with me. This, ladies and gentlemen, was something I could never forget. This was Sheldon the mensch. The fifth commandment is known to all. It teaches us, honor your father and your mother. But the law goes on to say, as only 2 commandments in all of the Bible tell us, that the promise for keeping his rule of honor is long life. Sheldon treated his mother and his father, Anna and Martin Krys, whom my wife and I were truly blessed to know and to love. He treated them with the utmost honor, reverence, and love. Perhaps, just perhaps, that's why Sheldon got to live to the ripe old age of 90. We may never know the answer, but one thing is for certain. He treated his parents in the quintessential way that the Torah dictated to us. This was Sheldon the Mensch. And yet, I will tell you, at the risk of perhaps sounding like a heretic, Sheldon did not need the 5th commandment to tell him how to act. He knew that all by himself. He acted accordingly and lived that way his entire life. And it was the same kind of love and reverence that he showered on the love of his life, Doris, for almost 50 years. The very same love and devotion that he showered on his 3, as he called them, his 3 Mädel, his 3 girls. His relationship with Doris was truly iconic. I recently read an article which appeared in a publication of the Jewish Telegraphic Agency. Let me tell you, as a background, this is a story about a Reform rabbi, a woman Reform rabbi. And I underline woman and Reform because as a retired Orthodox cantor, we weren't accustomed to women rabbis and weren't accustomed in the Orthodox tradition to what goes on in a Reform temple. But this story shows a lot. This Reform rabbi in Brooklyn, New York, at the end of her Rosh Hashanah sermon, spoke to her 1,300 members assembled in the sanctuary. And she said, "I have a present for each of you. It's a necklace with a Jewish star." This capped her sermon that addressed the October 7th massacre of over 1,200 of our brethren and sisters in Israel, and the war in the Middle East, escalating concerns about enormous anti-Semitism worldwide, and what it feels like to be a Jew in an uncertain moment. She said the necklaces reflected both a need for Jewish visibility and her belief that people of all backgrounds and ideologies have equal claim to Jewish identity. It's a way of saying to the world, she said, "Why, yes, I am Jewish. This is what a Jew looks like. This is what a Jew stands for. This is how a Jew behaves." This, friends, is how Sheldon acted his entire life. He was so proud of his Jewishness of his, what he called his Yiddishkeit. He loved speaking in Yiddish, which he and I did quite often, never having to worry that anyone was listening because no one else could understand. He loved speaking in Yiddish. He recalled dozens upon dozens of Yiddish songs and knew the words for each of them and would often sing them to me. The words were great. The feelings were magnificent. The voice, although he dealt with many people around the globe who were clearly not of the Jewish faith, yet he never hesitated to make it clear that he was Jewish and was proud of it. I believe that this pride was one of the reasons that Sheldon and I felt so close to each other. I was, in many respects, his link to his Jewish pride, and he, in turn, was my link to his parents, whom I revered and who very, very honestly became my surrogate parents after both my parents passed very young. This, my friends, was Sheldon Krys. And now, while we are enormously grateful for the many years we had with him, we are now deeply saddened by his passing. And so we now pray that his soul will be bound up in the bonds of everlasting peace as we all together say, Amen. At the conclusion of the memorial prayer, which I chant in Hebrew and then recite in its English translation, we will continue to the internment, at the conclusion of which the family invites you to a gathering at Manor Country Club. May I ask you to please rise. Shochein v'ameromim hamitzei menuchonechono itzel kanfei hashchieno v'malos kedoshim utehorim kizar horokia meirim umazhirim eseni yishmas Rebbe Shevach Yaakov Rebbe Mordechai Sheyolach Le'Elomo Ba'avur Shebnei Mishpachto Nodvim Le'Tzedakah V'chulanu Mispalelim Ve'ad azkara senishmoso began Eden Tehyei menuchoso לכן בעל רחמים יסתירני בססר כנפיו לעולמים ויצרו בצרון החיים הסני שמוסו אדוני הוא נחלוסו וינוח בשלום על משכבו ונאמר Amen. O God, full of compassion, who dwellest on high, grant perfect rest beneath the sheltering wings of thy divine presence among the holy and pure who shine as the brightness of the firmament, unto the soul of the Honorable Sheldon Jack Krys, who has gone to his eternal home. Master of mercy, we beseech thee, shelter him forever under the wings of your presence. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life eternal, and grant that the memories that we each have of him and his life inspire us always to noble and consecrated living, as together we say, Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, at this time we will be proceeding to the grave area, which is of course here on the grounds of Norbeck Memorial Park. If you are able to stay and join us after we bring Mr. Krys out, please return to your car and follow along. We will not go actually in formal procession. However, the cemetery is not so large that you will see exactly where the hearse goes, and you may follow along in your car. The grave area is actually on the far side of the cemetery. So, ladies and gentlemen, at this time, would all those who are serving as pallbearers please come forward?
The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever.